Hi everyone, welcome to today's webinar. Just a couple of housekeeping things before we begin. If everyone could please keep your microphones on mute and your cameras turned off. We will have a Q&A session at the end, so if you do have any questions as we go through, just pop that into the chat box. We're going to keep it short and snappy today, so 20 minutes for our presentation and then about 10 minutes at the end for the Q&A. So in terms of introductions, I'm Kirsty McLaren. Next to me is Nikki Walshaw. We run recruitment agency McLaren Recruitment, and we specialise in recruitment at all levels, from administration to chief executive and everything in between. We work across all sectors and are particularly well known for our expertise in the non-profit, membership and professional association space. Ooh.
And joining us today is Craig McAlpine and Kyla Hindle from My Career Brand. Craig is the founder of My Career Brand. In addition to working one-on-one with his clients, Craig designs and facilitates My Career Brand job seminars and workshops. He is a regular guest speaker and publisher on LinkedIn, presents Asia Pacific webinars, and is a guest on UK podcasts for job seekers. Kyla has a background in recruitment and is now a strengths-trained career coach with My Career Brand. A regular poster on LinkedIn, she specialises in working one-on-one with job seekers at all levels to allow them to present themselves with confidence through the job search process.
So in terms of our webinar today, as you know, it's focused on how you can best prepare to tackle your job search. So as per the slide there, we're going to cover a brief job market update, your mindset and your why and your plan, and your touch points through the recruitment process from application through to job acceptance, your close off, and then, as I say, Q&A at the end. So before we hand over to Craig and Kyla, we'd like to provide you with a brief job market update.
Okay, so it's probably unsurprising to hear that job numbers or job ad numbers are down again. According to Seek, there was a slight uptick in January, but month on month ad numbers are down 0.4% in March and a whopping 27% compared to March last year. Wellington and Taranaki experienced the biggest drops of 38% and 30% year on year. And then job applications, they rose for the 6th consecutive month, and we're seeing consistently higher numbers of job applications for jobs, even at a very senior level. The well-publicised redundancies and disestablishments of roles at many government agencies, coupled with the predicted hiring freezes, are likely to further fuel applicant numbers in the coming months, unfortunately. It was interesting to see that the Public Service Commission revealed last week that the number of government workers actually increased by 4.1% in the final 6 months of last year, despite the order to cut costs and by previous governments. So I think what's happened, though, is a lot of people who would usually work in contracting or fixed term agreements, they've tried to get into permanent jobs to avoid not getting an extension. So numbers are expected to drop in line with the government savings and efficiency drive, and as budget 2024 decisions start to flow through.
I guess the question is, what does this mean for you? Less job opportunities and higher competition means that you really need to make your job applications stand out and be as best prepared as you can to give yourself the best chance for success, which Craig and Kyla are going to talk you through. So over to you, Craig and Kyla.
Hey, thanks very much, Nikki and Kirsty. We wanted to bring up first of all the mindset, because going into any redundancy or any job search, we need to make sure that we are match fit. And so when we think about the concept of balance in spirit and mind and body, what we're really thinking about is, what is the essence of us? So who are we? What are our values and beliefs? Be very strong about that, going in and actually own them. I just came off a call from a senior HR person, and she's going into a process. And confidence is not just something that junior people or whoever are lacking. It can extend right up through to the most senior person as well. So what is our mental and emotional state? So we're thinking about our thoughts and our feelings and our attitudes. So going into that, really healthy attitudes. In a meeting I had again earlier this morning with somebody who has been in a role for 9 weeks, and I was talking about how did she go through that process? How was she feeling? And she said that there were moments, when there were darker times. So, when you get the no's and the well maybes and never hear back or anything like that. And it's very important. What she said was what got her through was not getting into that spiral, not getting into that downward spiral. And then body. Okay. So making sure, look, you don't all have to be, gym fanatics and marathon runners and so on. I'm certainly not. But going for a walk or getting out and getting that fresh air, looking after yourself, taking a healthy attitude, to life, mind and body is really, really important as we go through this whole job search piece. So bear that in mind. Kyla, have you got anything to add to that?
I think just really trying to make sure that your job search doesn't consume you is a very good mindset to have as you go through this. And it's a very challenging mindset to have if you are job seeking as a result of a redundancy. I think making sure that you bring some structure in your day so that you don't spend all day trolling through Seek or LinkedIn trying to find, a unicorn job that might not exist. That process is soul destroying. So I think just protect yourself from that. And just, as Craig said, try and protect your mindset. Like, take some time in your day to actually do things for yourself and structure that time into your day as well, and designate specific time, maybe an hour a day for job seeking, so that there's a specific time that you're doing it, but you're not spending all day at it.
I think the other thing is that just by the 3 circles, Kyla, they're not all necessarily equal, are they? So, it can be focusing on one thing, maybe more than the other, but the balance is actually, they all add up to being balanced.
Yeah, definitely. The other point that I wanted to make actually, and, following on from what Kirsty and Nikki have said, it is quite brutal out there for job seekers at the moment. And I think it's really important that you go into a job search process kind of expecting that. So be prepared for people to say no to you. It's much easier to cope with that no when you are not investing everything, fine line, isn't it? You want to believe that you'll get the role, but also manage your expectations that, you're one in a cast of thousands, or, you're one in many people that may well be going through this process for this role.
Nikki and Kirsty, have you got anything to add to that at all? I mean, from a recruiter's perspective, I guess you notice these things, don't you, when somebody comes into an interview room? How are they actually presenting,
Yeah, I think coming in with a really positive, optimistic attitude and demeanor that reflects that is an attractive proposition for potential employers versus the contrary. If somebody comes in feeling very negative, and the way that they talk about their previous employers and the experience that they're going through is very negative, it can't help but sort of have a negative impact on the interviewer, and doesn't make you feel quite as enthusiastic about considering them for the role. So
yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. So the next thing is the why, and this is not your personal why, although that's obviously really important as well, because coming back to that balance again, but it's your professional why, and that's your underlying purpose that drives your work and career choices. Now, stay true to that, because the opposite is actually not sustainable. Now, whilst it might seem like you're grabbing and desperate, again, Nikki and Kirsty, I know that you'll know when people come into you for a job interview, and Kyla, when you're working through interview skills, as coaching in preparation for interviews, it's really obvious when people, get desperate because they're not able to talk authentically, to their why they're doing the job. It's, that old saying, oh, I really love your company. I've been looking forward to joining you forever, and this is my dream role. That's not what the employer is looking for, in terms of your why. And how do you get there? Okay, so start thinking about the research and the alignment, so before any interview, and I know, Kyla, we focus a lot on this, the role alignment and capability matrix tool that we use. use. It's like, why are you here, and where's the evidence around that? So as Nikki and Kirsty said, the competition is really, really tough at the moment, and the people who are getting through are the ones that really understand their why and are able to articulate it right from the very get-go, that very first pitch, and we'll talk about that shortly on the touch points. But your passion and enjoyment, let that shine through. But you don't want to do the Tom Cruise and get jumping on the couch either. It's like keep it all in balance, and and there's a good balance there. And if you're not sure about how that comes across, ask the person who's coaching you. Like Kyla for the interview skills coaching, or also your recruitment consultants like Nikki and Kirsty. At the end of your time with Nikki and Kirsty, ask them, how did I come across? What could I be actually demonstrating more or demonstrating less? Where am I about right? They're experts, and they know what their employers or their clients are actually wanting to see as well. So the knowledge, connection, and that's connection with the organization. I talked about authenticity before, so making sure that that's there, and not pretending to be something. Come across as who you are.
And I
Tyler,
think
anything? Oh, sorry.
So
Kirsty.
I think that why it talks to also why this job, but also why this organisation, because the job, might be something that's really of interest, but then you get to the question, and why would you like to do that in this organisation? And sometimes people are like, oh, I don't know, or just the answer can be a little bit generic, and that it's actually not that opportunity that really floats their boat. And so other people that have demonstrated that they're really interested in both the job and the organisation and the why is again much more compelling.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. And I'd even say to go one step further and talk about why the industry as well. It really tightens up if you can communicate a really strong alignment to the industry, the organization, and the role itself. It really tightens up all those pull factors that are pulling you into that specific opportunity in that specific organization, rather than just, I really want to work for Coca-Cola and any role will do, or I really want to be a financial accountant and I don't care where I do it.
Yeah, I think that's really important too, Nikki and Kirsty. I know being in Wellington, you're probably closer to the action than a lot. And people who are coming out of government, for example, and maybe working, and that's quite, a separation between, or perceived separation between corporate and government. And why that change? So how are they going to relate? Would you come across that? It's tough, isn't it, for people coming out of that?
Yeah, and we do a lot of work in the non-profit space, and we are seeing a lot of people looking to transition out of government work to non-profit or charitable organisations, and it's those that are really able to demonstrate that why and that clear line of thought as to what the drivers and motivators are and how their experience translates and transfers to a completely different industry. People that can sum that up really articulately and succinctly in an interview fare much better in making that transition than those that can't.
Yeah, absolutely. Great, thank you for that. Okay, so now we're going on to your plan, and I've got a notebook and a pen there. We all know that if things aren't written down, then they don't happen. So thinking about what your vision, what is for your career, where are you wanting to go? We are seeing a lot of career transition and outplacements happening at the moment. And it's not just government, by the way, because obviously government are a big employer and a big buyer, particularly in professional services and so on. So where those costs get cut, there's a trickle down effect. So, everyone, doesn't matter where you are, you need to think about, maybe this is an opportunity for pivoting. And Kyla, you and I have talked a lot about broadening, the scope, of the job search. So don't be too narrow. I think in today's market, Nikki and Kirsty, we need to be thinking about transferability of skills and so on. So how does that intertwine with your vision, your mission? What's your goal? Really, really important. What's my strategy to actually getting there? Then what's, my action plan? The actions, when am I, what, by who, by when? It's a little bit like going to the gym. Why do people have a personal trainer? Because if they try to do it on their own, they're probably actually not going to go, but they've made a commitment to somebody else to be there. They've made the appointment. So how about getting a champion in, you know, somebody who's going to help you. Now, this is not a person who's going to be, you know, doom and gloom and feeding you with negativity. Think about what we were talking about before with the mindset. You need somebody who's going to be realistic, pragmatic, objective, not going to feed you with fluff, but you're also going to need, you know, somebody who's going to not drag you down, you know, all the time. Kyla, have you got
build your
anything?
confidence and hold you accountable. The other benefit, I think, to capturing all of this on paper, you know, I don't think many people go into a job search without really thinking about all of these things, but the process of actually capturing all of it on paper, documenting it, and then sharing it with somebody else means that by the time you are talking to a recruiter or you're talking to a hiring manager, your thinking is really clear and your communication around all of these things is really compelling. So, you know, it's just an extra stage in the process to really kind of get you on point. And to help how you present when it matters.
Nikki and Kirsty, have you got anything to add to that one?
Not particularly, but
Okay.
yeah, I agree with your comments.
Yeah, I was listening to a recruiter this morning, and they were on a call with a candidate, and the recruiter, I could only hear obviously one side of the conversation, but the recruiter saying, okay, so last week you told me you wanted to do this, now you're telling me you wanted to do that, so can you tell me about where you actually want to be? So it's, you know, now what does that speak to? So none of the above has happened here, you know, and if it has, then maybe there's some desperation creeping in. How confident is that recruiter going to be in putting you into a role when you're jumping and shifting all over the place because it's just a job?
Not very.
No, exactly. Yeah, so it's really important to have that right. Okay, so we're talking about our touch points now. Kyla, do you want to kick in here? We were talking about the CV, LinkedIn, and so on, and pitch.
Sure. So, you know, once you're really clear on your goal, your mission, your intention, and what it is that you're looking for, have a look at the tools that you're using to propel you into this job search, and just make sure that they're telling the right story. So in your CV, you know, your CV, we talk a lot about my career brand, about how your CV, whilst it's a historical document, it's a targeted forward-looking document. So does that CV position you, or does the content of that CV, in terms of your achievements and your skills, position you for the kind of job that you want to go into? And if it doesn't, have a look at your CV. The LinkedIn profile equally. So is your LinkedIn profile optimized? Is it consistent with the content of your CV? And do you understand how LinkedIn works? Like, is the content optimized for you to be found for those skills that you have? Are you using it? Are you using it to its full extent to engage with your network and connect with your network and market yourself as somebody that's available and competent to do the kind of roles that you're looking at doing? Equally with your cover letter, when you start to think about your cover letter, and it is a bit of a contentious issue, the old cover letter, but we would definitely recommend that our clients produce them, because they help you to align your thinking around how your expertise position you to tackle the key selection criteria of the role, and they really allow you the opportunity to draw those things together, so it's really clear for the recruiter why you're a fit, and how you know what experience propels you to tackling the role. So we've talked CV, we've talked LinkedIn, we've talked cover letter. Do you know what you're going to say when the phone rings? And that process of going through and documenting your goal, your strategy, your why, this will come to benefit you now, because when a recruiter rings you, you haven't got very long to tell them what your purpose is and what your value is. And if you can have real impact in the first sort of 30 seconds of that call, that's much more likely to propel you through to the stage where you are going to be invited to sit down with somebody and interview for the role. So think about your pitch, confidently talk about what you want, confidently talk about how your experience aligns you to this specific role, and also go into the interview with 5 or 6 specific stories that are targeted and most relevant to the role that you're applying for, so that you're going in with some focus into that interview, as opposed to kind of going in with decades of experience that you're going to have to juggle and draw from when you get into the room.
Yeah, I think some of those, that whole pitch thing, Kyla, is affirmational as well, isn't it? You know, practice it. You know, it's I am.
Most definitely. I think the pitch, and also, you know, tell me about yourself. It's a horrible question, but it often comes up. Tell me about yourself and why have you applied for this role? You'll be asked those questions, or questions like that, by a recruiter when they ring you. So if you can stand in front of the mirror and get that answer quite slick, or at least practiced, so that you can be confident in answering that question, rather than kind of going, haven't really thought about this, and they can hear your brain clunking, and you know, their interest levels are kind of dipping a little bit. Whereas if you're really onto it and you can answer that question with confidence, it gets that call off on a really positive note, and everybody's really bought into the conversation.
I think that coming into that pitch too, it's like if you've had a situation where perhaps the previous or your current role is not ending well, or for example, your role has been disestablished. You know, it's fashionable now actually to be disestablished. It's like role disestablishment, not you disestablishment. It's the role. Don't take it. It's not you personally. It's the role. So when you get asked that question, think about how you're going to answer it. You know, are you going to go into it negatively with a down? Well, my role's been disestablished, and so I'm having to look for a new job, rather than, well, my organisation's recently been through a restructure, and I'm taking the opportunity, having been my role being disestablished, to now look at the next role that I might look at, and these are the things that I'll be looking for, and this is what I'll be bringing to the table. So, you know, actually owning that. Have that pitch right. It's not just necessarily for the job per se. It's when Nikki and Kirsty call you, or you call them, and there is no particular job, and they ask you, oh, so why are you looking?
Yeah. I think the other important thing to remember when you're answering that question is to really separate how you feel about that situation to the facts. And that, you know, that's the best way to tackle it. I would just be quite direct, and stick to the facts around exactly what's happened, because you haven't made that choice in most instances. You haven't made that choice. You just had to accept it. So how you feel about it actually doesn't really matter. And if you start talking about your feelings, that's when a bit of negativity can creep in, and doesn't add a lot to your job search process.
It's real. Let's not take away from the fact that your feelings are real and they're valid and they're true to you. But as Kyla said, for a moment, just for a moment, try and separate them out. But don't not acknowledge them. Your feelings are absolutely true to you, and it's important that you acknowledge those. But Nikki and Kirsty, I think you could probably see negativity and so on coming off the person, even if they're not talking about, you know, just coming off their shoulders like dry ice, you know, sometimes, isn't it, in the interview?
Yeah.
So stay positive.
Yeah, agreed.
Right. Okay. So before we get into a Q&A, we've just got one last slide here. So your close off. And, you know, Nikki and Kirsty, we had an interesting, you know, conversation about this the other day, didn't we? It's like, how do you actually address, you know, the situation when perhaps you've not been successful, you know, in a role? How do you actually exit that process? And so what we talk about here is the locus of control. So things that you can control, things that you can influence but not control, and things that you absolutely cannot influence. how you actually go through that process, what you do about it, and coming back to what Kyla was talking about before, the positivity that you bring to the table throughout that process. You know, it might not be this time, but it might be the next time with that particular hiring manager and the organization. So leave that discussion that you're having now in a positive way. Any comments there, Kyla?
I think just remembering that often, you know, you never know where an opportunity is going to come from. So if you've been engaged in a process that doesn't go your way, something else could pop up with that organization or that hiring manager next week. And often how you exit that process and how you manage the how you kind of manage your communications with the organization through that unsuccessful process can often impact how you're considered for subsequent processes. So I think, you know, it's perfectly acceptable to feel sad and feel emotional and feel frustrated, but to show that, I would definitely not encourage that. I think just exit with grace.
Nikki and Kirsty?
Yeah, no, just on what Kyla's saying, you know, if in the moment the decline conversation that you haven't been successful for a role, you are feeling emotional, that's, you know, that's absolutely normal and absolutely okay. And if getting off the phone as quickly as you can in that moment is the best thing for you to do, then by all means do that. But come back to it and revisit it. You know, we would value a follow-up phone call once the dust had settled and the emotions were a little bit calmer, to discuss feedback, to, you know, take it as an opportunity to learn as much as you can about your, you know, performance in the interview and how you presented and where the gaps were that meant you didn't quite make it that time, and use that as a, I guess, a constructive opportunity for future job searches.
It comes back to the point we made earlier about having your champion and having that person that's going to take a pragmatic and objective view and not buy into negativity, but support you through that process by bolstering you, you know, fairly. So, you know, the last thing you need is somebody there that's saying, oh yeah, they had no idea what they're missing out on. Oh, that was a terrible decision. Yeah, you know, it should have been you. You know, that's not actually constructive criticism at all, or assistance. So sorry, make sure that, you know, the people that you've got going into bat for you are, you know, ones that are going to support you through the process. Okay, so some Q&As.
So one's come through. What would you suggest as an action to take when you've been shortlisted, but the role has been put on hold? Do you follow up?
Yes. Yeah. I mean, when it's put on hold, I guess try to understand the timeline for that. You know, is it an indefinite hold? Is it just a week or two? Yeah, ask those questions and diarise when they've committed to following up with you to provide an update. And if you don't hear on that date, follow up. Absolutely.
Kyla?
Yeah, I completely agree with that. I think as well, you know, you are if it's being managed by a recruiter and the role has been put on hold, they're going to want to build that relationship with you, and it is an opportunity for you to kind of connect and remain front of mind. I think, you know, there is a fine line between stalking somebody and you know, being persistent. So I think just find the right balance. But yes, absolutely, I would follow up.
Just a related subject to that, we are seeing a number of roles being withdrawn. You know, so, you know, it's a really good question. It's coming through quite a bit at the moment.
Agreed.
Another question, can we look further into cover letters? I've always wondered how strong to go and even how to open. I would very much welcome being considered for X job, which I see being a great fit for my skills and experience, or something else.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's a good sentence to use. You would then need to elaborate as to why you see yourself being a good fit with, you know, or why the role is a good fit with your skills and experience. So you want to qualify what you're saying with some tangible evidence. So draw on what you've done in the past, or the skills and experience you would bring to demonstrate why that is. But yeah, absolutely, that's a good opening statement.
Yeah, and it doesn't need to be lengthy.
No.
You know, just a one-pager that explains why you're interested, what you see as being your most relevant experience, and that's more than enough.
I think that's an important point, actually. And the other point that I would make about cover letters is that they don't always get read. So I wouldn't put content into your cover letter that you want a recruiter to see that is not in your CV. You know, anything that you really do want a recruiter to see and to be aware of, just make sure it's evident in your CV as well. Your cover letter is kind of where you draw it all together. But I've had a few conversations with people of late who are writing these elaborate, customized cover letters and using them to apply for roles with a CV that's kind of a page and a half long. And if all the recruiter sees is the CV, then that's a lot of wasted time.
Yeah, and also when all the relevant transferable experience somebody appears to have is in their cover letter, but none of that is in their CV, that becomes a really confusing application to consider. And more often than not, unless it's extremely compelling, would be put in that, I'm not sure about this one. So yeah, make sure it's reflected in you. And you know, you can tailor your CV and should tailor your CV for each application to ensure that you're really highlighting and emphasising the relevant transferable pieces there. Yeah.
What tips do you have about CV content? How can I make my CV stand out?
I think for the CV, you want your content to do the talking. So I wouldn't be drawn to colourful fonts or fancy layouts. I would keep the content of your CV really simple. Applicant tracking systems tend to prefer Word. But with your CV, essentially what you want to make sure that you're doing is looking at the key selection criteria for the role that you're applying for and making sure that you have got evidence in that CV of how you can tackle or how you're positioned to deliver on that key selection criteria. Also, if the CV, look at the skills that are being asked for and make sure that your skills are brief and concise and evidenced, or at least contextualized in terms of explained. Very often we see a big long shopping list of key skills that are on a CV that aren't targeted. So I think just making it as targeted as possible for the role that you're applying for will help to make it stand out.
Yeah. I think it's also really important not just to list what you were responsible for in your roles, but actually what you achieved.
Yes.
They're two quite different things. And I think you need to highlight some of your key achievements in each role in bullet point form, as well as what you were tasked with being responsible for.
It's a really good point. It shows how well you've performed in the role by including that.
And also perhaps a little bit of context about the organisation that you've worked for. It might be a brand that's not that well known, and it might be that as a recruiter or a hiring manager, you have to go looking. So if it's right there, a little bit blurb about what the organisation does, the industry sector, that's really useful as well. Next question, would you have different advice for those of a neurodiverse nature who may be more black and white, etc.?
It's challenging, isn't it? I think if you get a question like "tell me about yourself," for example, that is a very difficult question for someone who's neurodiverse to respond to because it's so ambiguous. I think asking questions to clarify exactly what the recruiter or the hiring manager is asking for will really help you to be more targeted in terms of the detail that you share. Is there anything else that you would add, Craig?
Often, and you do not want to do this every time, but to your point, Kyla, yes, clarify. That clarification question actually also gives you time to think about it. Use it sparingly, but if you sort of think you know what the answer is to the question, but you're working through things in your mind, ask back again. Say, okay, can you tell me what what are you actually referring to here? When would you like to know more about my professional career, or do you want to know more about me as a person? Because often, maybe they do want to know something about you as a person. What are your interests? They're breaking the ice. It's that whole rapport building thing. So if you jump straight into the cut and thrust of work, maybe that's not what they were looking for. Generally it is, but I think ask a question.
Sancat has recently moved to New Zealand, and their previous experience is in the non-New Zealand market and banking. What can I do to be considered? Is New Zealand experience a must?
In banking, yes. There are some industries, it depends what you're working in. Like if you're working on an FX desk or something like that, then potentially. But if you're working in, so probably some more context around that question would be useful. But if you're working, say, in a customer relationship or sales situation, then local context and so on. Like if you're working in the agri sector, for example, then maybe some local context would be useful, and there'll be other candidates that might be preferred. So I think it depends which area of banking and finance you're actually working in as well. Look, we get a lot of expat banking people coming into New Zealand. The international banks, they move their people around, so clearly it's not an issue for them. So yeah, it's worth a go. But I think be clear about what your value proposition is for the New Zealand sector or New Zealand banks.
And do your research as well to try and gather the information that you can, and speak to people, network, and do all you can to be prepared, because you can't say you've got that experience if you haven't, but if you can demonstrate that you've gone to lengths to learn it, then that's going to be really helpful. And we've got one more question here. Can we provide some ideas for the introduction section of LinkedIn, so just below the name?
For your headline?
Yes, it's the headline experience, Kyla. Okay, so let's be specific about that. So it's just below the name, there's the headline experience, and we should be talking about what you actually deliver, what you do. It'll automatically populate with the name of the company that you're in if you've got that turned on when you create that company. What you need to do is break it down into what you do. If you're referring to the about area, then you've got something like around about 2,000 odd characters that you can put in there. And that needs to be pitching yourself. What do you do? Who are you? What do you deliver? What are the outcomes and so on? So it's really a short bio, of yourself. So yeah, two areas there. The other thing that you've got to think about the headline experience on LinkedIn, but just below your name, is that when you comment or something, and Kyla talked about LinkedIn earlier, LinkedIn is not just a digital CV. LinkedIn requires activity. It is a brand builder. I've got this saying that I coined was your brand marches before you. LinkedIn is an excellent vehicle for that. And your comments, your contributions, your support, think about what LinkedIn was meant to do right at the start, was actually to support your network. So making sure that your headline experience, when you do comment on something, remember every time your name pops up in a comment, your headline experience is there as well. What you're doing is passively branding yourself without doing anything. So your headline experience should be saying what you deliver, not the company that you're in and the job title. It's like, what am I? It's like Craig McAlpine, career coach, blah, 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 blah. It's what I deliver.
Couple more questions if we do have time. As a recruiter, is it rude for candidates to chase up an application?
No.
You
should definitely do that. If the application close date has passed and you haven't heard within a week or so, then follow up. Following up before applications have closed, probably not the best idea, just because typically you'd wait until applications have closed, so then we'd be reviewing them all in conjunction with each other. But definitely, if you haven't heard a week or so after close date, follow up.
Nothing wrong with a heads up that I've applied though. If you know the recruiter, just in case your CV has slipped into oblivion, in the the bottom of their ATS, which is horribly not yours there's
that
Kirsty and
wouldn't
Nikki, of
happen.
course. Yours is perfectly configured. But, you know, I have had situations before with clients where their CV has actually not made it float to the top, and following a call to say, hey, blah, 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 and the recruiter's actually gone in and grabbed it. So, you know, not all recruiters are like Kirsty and Nikki, you know, that will actually, you know, look at all of the applications and make sure that they're not missing anything and they're combing through. So, yeah, I think definitely a follow-up, but definitely also a heads up that you've applied is sometimes worth it.
A question in regards to gaps in CVs. So if you've had a lot of gaps in your CV due to having a few kids and you're coming back into your career, but have been made redundant recently too, how do you approach that? And also, if you've been on leave for 6 years plus after having kids, what do you do in terms of referees?
Okay, well, there's two different points to that. So in terms of the CV content, I would literally just own it. I'd say, you know, family time, and just put a little heading in there. We all have it. It's cool. You know, perfectly acceptable. There's nothing wrong with that. In terms of the referees, you know, obviously you're out of the workforce for that period of time, so you're not going to be able to provide a referee. I would think more broadly, you know, often when people are off and have family time, they might volunteer, they might help at the school. Like I would think about whether there is experience that is relevant that can actually go into your CV from that time. And that might also lead to potential referees. But equally, referees from 6 years ago, if that was when you were last working, it is what it is. So that would be perfectly acceptable.
Agreed.
And last question, my first job was 1986. Can the CV go to 3 or 4 pages?
Don't know if you need to go as far back as 1986 on your CV. You could consider just listing the role, organisation and dates for a few of those earlier jobs, and then going into more detail on the more recent jobs. I guess listing the earlier one shows the career trajectory in terms of the different moves that you made throughout your career since then. But yeah, I wouldn't go into any detail about jobs going, you know, that far back. I think it's probably more just your last sort of 10 years max experience that would be really interesting to see on a CV.
Yeah, I often refer to as an upside down pyramid. You know, the more detail for the most recent role, tending to go, and we tend, Kyla, to say, look at the last 10 to 15 years. If there's anything relevant from, say, beyond that, bring it up into the first couple of paragraphs of the first page of your CV by saying, earlier in my career, I held a role as blah, 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 whatever, which will deliver X, Y, Z to the role of. Okay, so be specific about that, and you can cover that off and see. So, and you had the thing in there about the question, 3 to 4 pages. Actually, a CV is 3 to 4 pages anyway. You know, so if you need to have in your CV, think about it as the role title, bit of description about the organisation, as Kirsty and Nikki talked about before. What was the challenge of the role? Why were you hired? What was the purpose? Key responsibilities, key achievements. You know, so you can take easily, you'll be filling 3 to 4 pages with 15 years of experience. Clear, concise, but telling the story. The first page is about, it's really a bio. You know, you should be able to sell yourself on the first page of your CV. If the recruiter gets bored in the first few paragraphs, they're not going to turn the page. You know, well, they might, but it might be because they're desperate in today's market. They're not that desperate. So, you know, it's like, you know, the CV's got a pop on the first page. And as Kyla pointed out before, it's not about color, not about fancy this and fancy that. It's about the content. You know, is this person going to deliver? Right. Shall we call it a close on the Q&A now?
Yes, all of them.
Right. Okay, so thank you everyone for attending. We will be following up with an email within the next few days, and in that email we'll actually be including an offer from my career brand if you do want to get in touch with us. So it will be some discount on your first hour of coaching with my career brand. You might want to use that just to get one of our team to actually review your CV or to test your pitch even. If you just want to test some of the key elements that you took away from today's session and say, well, how am I going on this? And you know, spend that hour with one of our coaches, or you might want to look at your total job search strategy or even look at your strengths. So what are the strengths as opposed to the skills that I'm bringing to the table? So have a think about that. We'll be sending out an email, as I say. Do get in touch with Kyla or one of the our team, myself included, at My Career Brand if you need assistance. And of course, I know Nikki and Kirsty, you're always open to calls and so on from candidates as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Right. Well, thank you very much, everyone. Kirsty and Nikki, anything to add, or you're all good?
Yeah, no, thank you.
Okay, good. Kyla, you're all good?
No, I'm all good. Thank you, guys. And thanks everybody for jumping on and attending.
Yeah, thanks so much. We really appreciate your time, and all the very best for those of you who are in the job search market at the moment. Remember, spiral up, not spiral down. So keep it positive. Okay, thanks very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Okay, bye.
Bye.